On today's episode of Unmute the Voices, I am joined by Curtis Stewart, who was most recently nominated for a Grammy Award for his solo performance as a violinist. It's caused a little bit of controversy, so we're going to talk about that as well as his love for New York pizza here on Unmute the Voices. Curtis.
Hello. Hi, I'm happy to be here. Yeah.
I'm so glad to have you here, Curtis. I gotta ask you first, how does it feel to be nominated in the Best Solo Performance category for the Grammy Awards in classical music?
I mean, it's an honor. I mean, the first thing I saw were the other nominees: Gil Shaham, Augustine Hadley, Jennifer Coe, there's the violinists, and Simone Dinnerstein's amazing, Mac Grigic. I mean, these people are I used to, when I was 15, I used to just listen to Gil Shaham's Prokofiev concertos on repeat.
Yes. Yo, I have a Gil Shaham's promotional album. So back in the day, Deutsche Grammophon used to do like promo CDs to kind of see how the artist was going to perform and how, they were going to sell. I have him at 15 years of age playing the Strauss Sonata and Carmen Fantasy with piano.
Right.
And Paganini 1 arranged for violin and piano.
Yes.
And that was his promo album.
Right. Loosely, because let me just throw something together here. Right. It's ridiculous. All these massively difficult.
Yeah, but you're right up there with them.
But that's the cool thing. And what I think is the coolest part about it is, I mean, this album was really a letter of love to my community. I was just accumulating music over the years from Coleridge Taylor Perkinson's Louisiana Blues Strut. I played that on the stage of Carnegie Hall, strutting from one side of the stage to the other and back with Jason Moran and Alicia Hall-Moran for this project called Two Wings, which kind of noted the music of the Great Migration and how people of color moved from south to north. They also changed the course of the history of music. So I just happened to have that in my belt, and I had been meaning to work on some Paganini and blah, blah, blah. I've been working on this Lift Every Voice and Sing arrangement for a while. And it was just kind of like a lot of things that I ended up putting together and had the time to put together. And it's cool that the Academy is ready to celebrate this music that is by a Black artist working on reworking the music of Black artists, and staking a claim that it is truly classical music. I mean, I was looking at the history of this award. I mean, the first person to win it was, I think, Arthur Rubinstein. Yeah. And then it went on to Vladimir Horowitz, and then it went, so it's just, I can't, it's weird. I think I'm probably mostly just in shock still, and I just feel very honored.
Yeah. So I mean, shock, obviously, I mean, that I think is a great adjective to say how you're feeling, but what other sorts of feelings, I'm sure, has been kind of a mirage or a roller coaster of emotion.
Sure.
What was that like when you found out that you are, not that you weren't great before, but now you're legendary?
Hey, I just found that out. You just told me that. Thank you.
No, but seriously, I mean,
just found that out. That feels great.
Seriously, though, you're among the greats who are legends in our field, and now you're one of them.
Wow. Well, it's Well, I'll tell you exactly what happened. First of all, I wasn't even checking the Grammy nomination things. I just figured it wouldn't happen. And I started getting these texts like, "Hey," or exclamation point. I was like, what is happening? It's like the world ending. What's happening?
Mhm.
And then somebody sent me a screenshot and I was like, oh my God, what? I was just in shock. I like almost cried, of course. I was very happy for about 1 hour. And then I just started thinking about it because the album that I've made is, it's very much inspired by the pandemic, but it's mostly actually inspired by my experience being a caretaker for my mother who had recently passed in September. And, just the feel that I got the nomination in the second week of November. I was kind of preparing for my first Thanksgiving without my mom. And so after 1 hour of this feeling of celebration, it was just like a steep decline into depression, actually, through Thanksgiving. And it was so weird because so many people are like, yeah, so excited. And it was, which is actually good. It forced me to pull myself up to those moments and feel appreciative and feel grateful despite being pretty low. But I'm excited. I'm back to, I feel like I've come through that now. So I'm just back to being excited. Also, I might be playing on the Grammys. They just emailed me about playing on the Grammys. So that's pretty cool. I was excited to go to LA, but Las Vegas is not bad.
I don't think it's bad. No,
it's great.
It's great.
Have you been to Las Vegas?
I've been to Vegas many times, but
I mean, all right, we won't talk about that.
Hey. I mean, it's great for you because you've hit the jackpot by being nominated for a Grammy Award. And I've never met your mother, and I've never met you in person either, but I am going to assume that your mother, as I understand it, was also a violinist.
That's right.
Is immensely proud of you in this moment, was likely very proud of you up until her passing, but I'm sure that energy is still here within this universe.
Yes, thank you for that. It is. It certainly is.
Yeah.
Actually, after that, I decided to start writing some. My mom was Greek, and she grew up in Poland, but her parents were from Greek, and she used to hang out with like the Greek gypsies that lived in Warsaw. And so she was constantly experimenting with Greek music, folk music, combining it with jazz and combining it with even reggae. There's a song on this album called Mangas, which was one of her, I always think of it as like one of her bangers. And Mangas was like the equivalent of Figaro. He was like the guy of the town. Everybody would kind of like, oh, Mangas,
Yeah.
And she just loved that aspect, and she brought that kind of swagger to the music. Anyway, I decided I just want to explore more Greek music. I was literally just recomposing just looking through Greek folk songs and just playing them and realizing that they're just all in my fingers. I've spent most of my time really exploring the music of like jazz, Coltrane, Charlie Parker, McCoy Tyner, all the, really digging into that, transcribing, getting it into my fingers, composing. But I hadn't really spent a lot of time playing Greek music, except when I would play with my mom. And I just started I was just playing. I was like, wow, this is right here. It's like right here in my hands. And so I feel like that is totally the spirit that you're talking about, that she's there with me. And I don't really tap into that in a very self-conscious way. Because when I think about it, I just get sad. So it doesn't help me to, and so I just do it through making music. I did it through, like, this is a new studio that I created in her old apartment, and I have a big picture of like this really wonderful Greek portrait that I'm looking at right over there. And I've got her violin is right over here. And, I just have these tributes to her. And she's right here.
That's beautiful. And so talk a little bit about Of Power. What is that? Which is your album, I should say. I should mention that.
Yeah. that's the album that just got nominated. Crazy. First of all, it was recorded in the little corner of my living room. Like, this is like 100 times more fancy. My girlfriend would look at me. I was on this like tiny chair, hunched over in the corner because it was the quietest place in the house. Trying to avoid like I would have my computer way off in the corner because the fan of the computer is so incredibly loud. And I had to, in order to avoid that sound, I had to do so many creative things in terms of recording. And so it has this like do-it-yourself DIY vibe to it. But that's mostly me just trying to grapple with the sound of my room and trying to make it sound like something and not like nothing. So it was recorded in my living room, but I had the concept of power in me since my last album, which was called Of Colors, which kind of explored the philosophy and attitude towards color, like when it just in an abstract way and also socially, of course. And when it, when you see colors out here, they can be very beautiful, but when they're coming from your skin, there's something very different about the feeling of how people react to what they see. So, after that, I had this idea about this project called Of Power, mostly because I had the idea that I had this one cover on that album of Outkast, or I guess Andre 3000's Prototype.
Oh yeah.
And that one got like 60,000 like views or whatever, and then everything else on the album got like 3 or 10 like views. So I was like, there's a lot of power in covers. There's a lot of power in interacting with pop music. That was like the first thought. And so that had been sitting, I recorded that and finished that album in 2014. So I had that concept kind of happening. I had another concept that I'm working on now, which is called Of Love. And then there's probably another one going to be called Of Time. Like, I'm very, very consistent in my titles.
Yeah.
But yeah. And I just like I was actually going to be working on a different project, but as I started creating music during the pandemic and reacting to things that were happening, mostly I was trying to just create music to give back to my community. I just posted on Facebook, the whole thing, see how people react. It would create conversation. There was one piece that I wrote like in the thick of, post George Floyd, I had to just write and think and share. And I posted it, and Facebook at that time was totally eliminating, like, if you posted about that, like, nobody would see it. Right. But the few people who did see it, I got probably like 5 calls from different people just relating and feeling like that I was speaking to them. I'd never gotten that reaction from my music before. And so I think that's what being of power is. It's about connecting. It's about tapping into those spur of the moment things and feelings and sensations and turning it into art and feeling safe in that world, safety in that world of art making.
Sure. And I mean, I think what comes also across with you doing these types of projects in your most recent project Of Power is the bravery and the courage to not just create an album in your living room, in the corner of your living room, but to have the courage to be personal, like really personal,
Right.
Not just talking about your mother, but also about the social issues like Breonna Taylor and how that's impacted you, or even just including different genres of music into your art form. That takes a lot of courage.
Right.
Why do you think it is that musicians in our field don't take more risk, don't muster up the courage to really express personally and professionally who they are as artists?
Right. Well, we're all in the classical world, we're so incredibly trained in one way.
Right.
And we do take risks. Every time we walk into that studio with your teacher, that's a risk, because you're you've worked so hard, you've worked for hours, this person's an expert, you would look up to them and they give you feedback. That's a risk. You can, every time I walked into my teachers, she would like shut me. She was one of those break you down to build you back up type people. So it was scary. So it is risky to do that. But in our field, we don't necessarily have the space to explore in the same way, to take risks, make mistakes when we're literally creating, composing, improvising, programming. You know, when I'm talking to my students at Juilliard, a lot of times they're thinking like, how am I going to get the job? How I love this creative stuff, but is that going to help me to get paid? You know, am I going to be able to have a career in this thing? And so the sense that they have to fit into the scheme that they've seen in order to have a career, which is funny because I would say that, you know, a lot of people think of, you know, what I do as like the kind of the outlier, the you know, the fringes of classical music. But I would say that in the grand scheme of things, classical music at this point is on the fringes of general music creation and production. So by doing something creative and quote unquote out of the classical box, you are suddenly entering a much bigger framework. And so you potentially have more opportunities to make money, to have a career, to get the gigs, to meet new people, to create. So yeah, I think first of all, it's a perspective. And then the other thing is that, you know, I think we don't think we're allowed to. You know, I was working with my students on the music of Lead Belly and the Chain Gangs. And there's a sense of, when we're playing that music, there's like a sense of prayer to it. It almost feels sacred when you're playing that music. It's just like, because that music is coming from this place. It's like one of the only places where African Americans were allowed to gather outside of the church was, you know, these chain gangs. Right. And in doing that gathering, they still made music. And it was just about like, we're gonna get there. We're gonna push through this. And there's a sense of sacred. There's this like, for me, it feels sacred. And I think a lot of students don't necessarily connect to that. You know,
because it's a bunch of just recycled ideas that are being passed on, right, from generation to generation. Right. And so it's like, how do you break that and really tap in to who you are as an artist and say, I can appreciate the tradition, the art form, but I'm going to bring my artistic self. I am going to express who I am as an artist. That takes a lot of courage because in our field, it's extremely judgmental. It's extremely critical. I mean, even you have faced that with your latest, you know, album. Right?
Yeah, right. Yes. There was two things that popped up. We were just talking about this earlier. First of all, yeah, when a certain article put out the nominees, they were like 3 violinists nominated for best classical, and they just left my lonely ass out there. I was just like, what? I play violin. And then, but they fixed it, and they were actually very apologetic about it. So I just want to say that.
And I just want to say for the record for that I'm the one who spoke up and said, that's not happening. We're not doing that here. We have a Black man from our community who has been nominated for this very prestigious award, and you will acknowledge him. And you're going to put your face on the front page with everybody else, because now he's one of our legends. Period.
Wow. Well,
and that happened the next day.
That's right. It sure did.
It happened the next day.
Yes, it did. And, you know, it's funny, like people, well, they see something and then, I don't know how that happens. It only makes me wonder.
Because they're not used to seeing us. Right.
Or the cover didn't look like a typical classical, you know, it's like a fiery cover with my profile and, you know.
But that's the whole thing of what we're talking about here, right? Which is that it's not one size fits all.
Right. And it's
right?
funny because like even if you were to do a cursory listen of the album, the first track is this Coleridge Taylor Perkinson, which is only violin.
Right.
Second track is a Paganini Caprice. The third track is like this like really flighty violin, whatever, drum track. Like there's a lot of violin. I mean, there's a lot of singing, there's a lot of tracks. There's a lot of violin. Even if you just listen to the first 3 tracks, even if you listen to the first 2, just the first track, there is a lot of violin on there. Anyway.
But so, you know what? That those sorts of disparities and those types of challenges are what we face. That right. The public doesn't know is you don't fit this image. Your music doesn't fit what we consider to be classical, and we're going to tear you to shreds about through the media, and we're going to tell you, no, you're not actually worthy, and you should not have been nominated.
Right. In fact, there was an article that literally said that. There was a second article that came out recently that they literally said that. Well, I was happy to be paired with John Baptiste, but John Baptiste and Curtis Stewart are the 2 albums that should, the Grammys have whatever, it's rigged. It's rigged. It's like, how is it rigged? It's literal votes.
Right.
They're just counting votes. Anyway, some people would argue that, the committee situation has changed, but there in fact I just want to make it clear that there were people on committees to make sure that everything was in the category that it needed to be in.
That's right.
I want to make that very clear to anybody that's listening. And I shouldn't know this, but I do know that after the fact, somebody came to me and told me like, oh yeah, I saw your stuff. Nice. From one of those. And so it's just frustrating. I mean, and then they posted it and they didn't even talk to me about it. I'm like a normal person. Right. And so all these like comments came out saying like, oh, all these people with all these millions of dollars. Dude, I was like, I made this thing in my living room. This was like made on my little crappy computer that wouldn't stop fizzing.
Right.
So I had to do all this other, and so then he asked me, so I just showed up on their page and I was like, this is very hurtful. And as educators, I think we should probably have a discussion about this, especially for our students who happen to be the next wave. And if your point is, if you have a valid point, I believe I had a valid point. I believe if you have a valid point, we should be talking about this so that your students at the Berklee School of Music can make their own decisions.
Right.
And they're not seeing things from one point of view. Because if we're gonna make these points, I'm gonna come out here and do that. And so like I then, proceeded to give my, dissertation on all of the histories of music that have used electronic tracks, vocals, verse, the music of Black composers, the music of the blues, all of those things, white composers that have done each one of those things, and it's been fine. And maybe they haven't all been in the same place. Maybe
that ain't your problem.
Right. And so anyway, I'm getting mad about it now. So
but I'm glad we're talking about this because it's almost like the TMZ of classical music.
That's right.
Right? When we should be celebrating this amazing art form, the creativity. I mean, the trailer is fire.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I made that.
Fire.
Like all my like little premiere, just like up in my premiere, like, okay.
It was fire. And anyone who's not moved by that is not paying attention. Right? And so it's like you're at a place in your life where we should be celebrating and uplifting you, and to have voices that are causing friction and discord is just ridiculous. It's totally ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. It's almost like, when I don't want to, anyway, I'm going to just say this thing. If you're talking to a student, or if you're talking to a younger person who hasn't had that conversation before, they're going to say all kinds of things that are just problematic. And that doesn't necessarily mean, it can mean a lot of things. But for me, I'm used to dealing with high school kids. I'm used to dealing with college kids, young middle school kids, and having these conversations. And for me, I was like, okay, well, let me just use this as an opportunity to gather our troops. I'm not saying gather. I'm not going to try to convince them. I'm just going to put these thoughts out here and just make it like, no, this is what I'm doing is valid. I don't need to say this, but I'm going to say it to potentially connect, build, and reach out to you, who you apparently need this.
Right.
You need to hear this so that you know that this music belongs here. I'm telling you it belongs here. The whole academy is telling you it belongs here. I'm reaching out to you to talk to you, to say,
right.
I'm not disparaging you publicly. Even right now, I have all kinds of feelings about it. I'm trying to be as open as possible to keep the conversation going, because there's a lot of people who will hear it on first, be like, it's not, and if I was younger, I might listen up and think the same thing. And there's a lot. There's all these unknown biases. They're known. I think I know them, but there's a lot of these unknown layers of biases that, like, why is it that when somebody plays a blue note, like like it has that pang, like that blue sound to it, suddenly it's not classical. Like when Bobby McFerrin literally sings the exact Bach prelude, he's singing the notes.
There's
no improvisation.
It's got to be the Tristan chord.
Yeah. There's got to be some Wagner in there, right?
Right.
But my point is, like, I don't even want to sit. And the thing is, like, at that point, I can't tell somebody that if they're so deep in their biases, they're trained, they've got decades of training, they think of themselves as they're an artist, they've been creating, and they're not going to hear what I'm saying and be like, oh, there's some bias there.
Right.
Oh, there's some potential racism there.
How do we change that?
I don't know how we change that.
How do we change it?
I mean, I don't know. I don't think I've successfully changed someone else. So,
or at least change the narrative of getting people in the academy. And I'm talking now specifically about universities and studios and conservatories, because that's where it's ingrained, right?
Right.
How do we get those people, part of the establishment, to think differently?
Well, I mean, I have no idea. I think I just keep existing.
Do we need to program your music as a audition piece, as a major audition piece for violinists who are applying to master's level or doctoral or even undergraduate programs? I mean, you teach at Juilliard, you're been nominated for a Grammy Award. How come some of that music is not programmed?
Actually, some students even reached out to me, and I sent them versions of the pieces that I played. It was really cool. Somebody wanted to play my "Isn't She Lovely" arrangement, so that's awesome. I can't wait to hear it.
But why isn't that part of the curriculum?
Yeah, right. Why isn't
Isn't that how it starts to change? There's
a lot of fear, and then there's a lot of hurt. That's what I'm seeing. The fear comes from the teachers who are very established. One teacher who I really admire, actually several teachers who I really admire, have said this thing to me, which is like, oh yeah, I'm teaching this class on the performance practice of the blues. So not necessarily improvising, but how do you bring those blue notes, the twang, to when you're playing Louisiana Blues Strat, it's got to have a vibe. It's got to have the blues, right? And then I told that to one of my beloved teachers. They're like, oh, that's really hard to teach, isn't it? And I was like, yes, Mozart's very hard to teach too.
Right.
So there's a fear of the teachers because it's hard for them to teach, and they need to be established. They need to feel like the authority in the room. So it's hard for a teacher. I need to feel like that too. It's hard for me as the teacher to feel like I don't know something, or that I'm exploring something with a student for the first time, even though the teacher knows the violin so intimately. Wouldn't it be beautiful to be exploring something with your fellow students at the same time? you as a very expert violinist, just musician, and the student as a burgeoning, excited, inspired player. That would be wonderful. All right. So anyway, that's the fear aspect. And then there's the hurt, which is, I think a lot of people either gave up a career performing, they didn't get what they wanted to get when they were at college. They didn't get what they wanted to get in their careers. They didn't get something, so they're hurting. And there's a lot of projection that happens after that. They didn't get it because this, when they don't necessarily know. You have no idea. Like, for example, I would say I'm a late bloomer. I'm 35. I didn't win really any major competitions. I applied for them. I went for them. I didn't get into grad school, but I just kept going, mostly because my parents were these like beacons of models of artistry. But I just kept going. I had my string quartet, PUBLIQuartet, and we were creating. I had the Mighty Third. I had all these bands I was in, just creating in New York, and so I just kept going. So I didn't get the chance to fail, or I didn't get the chance to think of myself as failing.
As a failure, yeah.
And so all those projections, I was battling those projections at all times. And this is just my theory. And so, like, for example, I'll go to a party where there's all these artist managers. I'll ask them, "Oh, did you ever play an instrument?" "Yeah, I used to play in college." I used to play. And then they'll come out and say, like, I'll be like, "Oh, I'm playing this arrangement I did of Stevie Wonder's Isn't She Lovely," for this, like, I'm in New York, like all these massive, really established, knowledgeable, excellent musicians and artist managers are there. They've seen everything, It's like, "Oh, that's nice. That's so fun. That's so light and fun," which the piece is light and fun.
Right.
But they're saying it in this way where it's like, this is what it feels like to me. It feels like they're saying that, "Oh, that's the thing that's just kind of light and like not serious. It's not serious music.
It's not serious, and it's not going to win you a job."
Right. But I mean,
because of the standard.
But it has been winning me jobs. I don't have a minute manager.
Right.
I don't have any. It's just been me. People have just been calling me, and I'm very grateful for it. And it's probably, post 2020. It's like people are like on the vibe, and I'm happy to be in that wave, and I'm happy to also keep pushing. But like, I started teaching at the Perlman Music Program last summer. Returning this year, so I'm like hanging out with Itzhak Perlman and talking to him about his experience, talking to Wynton Marsalis. Or we did a gig with Mark O'Connor. I sent something to him, and he came back to me. We were bouncing ideas back and forth. Things are just starting to happen.
Right.
I'm not sure what my point is there, but I guess my point is, it is serious music because it touches people in a joyous way. It touches people in a sad way. If you listen to this, the thing I did about Breonna Taylor is essentially like, I'm imagining what it would have been like to be Kevon Walker in the house. You wake up, you're looking over, your girlfriend's like, whatever's happened to her. It's like, you would have to kill me in that situation. And those are the lyrics of the song. And I was like, what is the perfect music for that? And my first thought was just like a Bach, the adagio from a Bach, just because it's like sense of like weight and spirituality and just like tremulousness.
Right.
And if you listen to that, it might be you might say it's too much, but there's no way you're going to listen to that and say, this is not serious. There's a song in the middle of it called Magic Might, which is, again, I wrote that actually before I even knew the album was going to exist. And the lyrics are, fight for life, fight for magic, fight for life, magic might. And that's me speaking to my mom. The video is these contortions of an image of my mother. And I mean, I will fight you if you tell me that's not serious.
Right.
There's no way you're going to come at me and tell me that's not serious. So if you take the time and listen, if you take the time, pull back those layers, just take a second and listen. Listen to more than 4 tracks in. Listen to more than 10 tracks. Listen to the first track. Then you might get it. Sorry, I'm getting angry again. But
No. I mean, and I think that just kind of summarizes what the album is, which kind of goes back to the title, which is Of Power, right? It's of power of the hurt, the pain, the love, the discovery, the inspiration, all of those things that encompass not only just the album, but also just who you are as a person.
Right.
And I think that's what we all try to do as artists, is bring our full selves to the out to whatever work that we're going to do. And
That's
so,
right.
when we do that, not everyone is going to like it and or accept it, but guess what? We still going to do our thing.
That's right.
And I'm so proud of you for doing your thing, because there's a lot of people who are watching how you're going to respond.
Right.
And how you respond is a teaching tool for others who desire to also be creative.
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much that goes on behind the scenes when something's created, like it's like the people around you. Like if I didn't have my quartet, I just wouldn't be who I am.
Right.
If I didn't know Jessie Montgomery, I wouldn't be who I am. If I wasn't with my partner, I wouldn't have had the thought to make an album. She was like, all this stuff is awesome. Like I was just putting stuff out for my community on Facebook.
That's beautiful.
That's all it was.
Yeah.
So it was for me. And then I was like, oh, maybe my friends on Facebook would like this. And then I put it out and I was like, oh, this is getting like 100 likes right now.
That's beautiful.
And then my girlfriend Meg was like, maybe you should make an album. And I was like, yeah, that makes sense, I guess.
Shout out to Meg. Shout out to Meg. And I mean, the other thing is, I mean, you're in New York City, so you're surrounded by all of these different people. I mean, New York City has 10 million people. There's, lots of opinions, lots of ideas, lots of things going on. So,
well, it's interesting because I was literally in isolation when I wrote this. It's kind of funny what happens when I actually think about this with students in school. You're going to orchestra, you're going to theory, you're walking across the streets. New York is new. Everything's crazy. You're meeting these new people. Everything's crazy. You're in a swirl, right? This whirlwind of new thoughts, ideas, feelings, worries, experiences. And then you're expected to create.
Right. Right.
And that's you're creating the stew at that point. You're creating the material, and then that becomes the canvas that you can, not the canvas, but the materials for you to make your sculpture. And so it's really hard to create while you're going through it for me. So when we were in quarantine, I was suddenly like, oh, all these ideas kept popping up, and it's like, oh, I guess I'll just do that. And I think that might be different for me than other people. I think a lot of people, because they didn't have that social obligation to show up somewhere,
right?
It was just like, what, forget, what is this? What am I doing? And that's totally fine too.
So outside of creating and doing your music, I'd love for you to tell us, that being that you're from New York City, your most scariest experience with a
New York
rat.
City moment. I shouldn't have brought that up. In the document you sent me, it was like, what's your favorite pizza?
I mean, I can find it. You can tell me what your favorite pizza is too.
And then I gave you that snap. I gave you that thing about Seattle being gray. And then suddenly, now we're talking about rats in New York. What is this? What is this?
Every New Yorker has a story about a rat.
I'm getting hit from all sides here. Trying to make some music. People are like, that doesn't belong. I'm on this. You're over here like, I'm proud of you. You're a legend. And then you're like, so how many rats do you talk to on a daily? What is this? I was like, sabotage. Scariest rat moment. I mean, there's definitely rats that have just run over my feet on the subway. You just waiting there, just
any that tried to fight you.
Well, no, not yet. I don't want to say anything too bad. I was going off on a way that
knock on wood. It hasn't happened yet.
It hasn't happened yet. No fighting rats.
Okay, so what is your favorite
pizza?
Yeah.
I really like Bleecker Street Pizza, which is on 7th Avenue and Bleecker Street. That place used to be this little tiny place, and now it's expanded. It's gotten so good. But I don't really go there anymore because there's no reason for me to be down in the Village. I used to pretty much do only gigs in the West Village, and kind of expanded to the Lower East Side and West Village, and it's kind of expanded. And so now I actually rarely play concerts in New York City, which is weird. But that's been a nice kind of process. But I still love that Bleecker Street pizza. Ben's Pizza is also good. It's right across the street from the Blue Note. Right on West 4th. That's also a little West Village pizza joint. It's got to be the perfect crust. It's got to be a perfect crust. It's the crust cheese ratio. That's what's important.
And of course, you would not tell that to a Bostonian, right?
No, I would straight up tell them. I would totally tell them. Like, we would have to have a conversation about it. Okay. Are Bostonians really like that about their pizza? I thought it was Chicago.
Chicago is more deep dish, right? So yeah, you guys aren't deep dish folks.
Yeah, I can't mess with a deep dish. No.
So I have one last question for you. You kind of alluded to this earlier, but I want to ask you. You're 35 years old. 20 years ago, you were 15. So if you had to meet Curtis Stewart of in 2002, now, what sort of advice would you give that young man?
I wouldn't. I don't know if I would give advice. I would just allow space for certain conversations that weren't that I thought weren't allowed to happen.
And so was he afraid of having those conversations, or?
I think he thought that people don't. This is just what it is. This is not. We're not talking about creating music. We're not talking about what it means to embrace the music that really sparks joy in you. We're not talking about why certain music spark joy in you and what that means about your pride of where you come from as both a Greek and African American. We would just talk about what the state of the world means for you as an individual, because I think I was kind of apathetic. I was like part of this, like, what am I, generation? What am I, a millennial? Am I a millennial? I guess maybe I am. But this kind of wave of apathy. The 2000 was it 2000 or 2001 election just happened, so it was like, wait, are we just like not voting? Are we just like not supposed to vote? Like, does voting count? Because they flipped the recount so many times. As a young person, I just was like, well, I guess it doesn't matter.
Right.
And I think that sense of apathy and distance kind of sent me off into the world of music and art and film, and so it made me serious about art in this imaginary zone, and that's great, and it helped me to be creative. But just to kind of, I would have conversations with that 15-year-old about how do you get in touch with reality, and how do you deal with these things that are kind of uncomfortable in a healthy way. But I also think that any 15-year-old is going through something like that, and so you have to have a process of going away, coming back, in terms of dealing with your life. So 50-year-old Curtis, you did great.
Man, it was a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for coming, and all the best to you.
Thank you. All the best to you. Thank you for having me. Yes, and thank you for your and everybody out their advocacy for me. In those times when people are being silly, I really feel it, and it's really extremely heartening. And the work that you do in that way is immeasurable. So
yeah. Well, we're all rooting for you, and we're wishing you the best. Hope that you continue to write music and record it in your living room. And kudos to Meg. Is that her name? Meg?
Meg.
Yeah, kudos to Meg for kind of pushing
Yeah,
you along to record that album.
that's right.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And thank
Yes.
you as well to all of our viewers for watching this very invigorating conversation between myself and Curtis Stewart. If you'd like to learn more about Unmute the Voices, I encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Until next time, I'm Dr. Quentin Morris, and I hope you have a great day. See ya.